In today's video, we're breaking down every insane Stranger Things theory that sounds insane until you realize 3 of them connect to reveal how Season 5 actually ends, starting with one that makes people angry. D&D campaign. This theory suggests that the entire Stranger Things series is basically just one massive Dungeons & Dragons campaign that the kids are playing. Every season starts with them huddled around Mike's basement table, rolling dice and planning their next adventure. And then, boom, the real action kicks off with similar themes. The evidence for this one goes way deeper than you might think, because Season 1 literally opens with a campaign where they're fighting the Demogorgon. And guess what shows up in the real world like 5 minutes later? The kids use D&D terms constantly to describe what's happening around them, calling creatures by monster names, and treating real life like it's another quest they need to complete. Season 2 throws in references to the Mind Flayer during their games, right before that exact entity becomes their biggest threat, and the coincidences just keep stacking up. The stage play. The first shadow expands on Henry's backstory, showing young characters involved in events that tie into the show's lore. Comics like The Other Side show alternate universe glimpses that feel suspiciously like different campaign outcomes, as if someone rolled the dice differently and got a whole new storyline. The games, especially Stranger Things VR, let you explore these mirror worlds where choices branch off into different paths, exactly like a dungeon master would present options to players. The Duffer Brothers have denied that the series is a D&D campaign, stating it won't end with an "it was all a dream" or similar twist like a game, but that denial almost feels too defensive, like they're hiding something bigger about the meta-narrative structure of their own show. Now here's where it gets weird. If the entire series is a campaign, someone's rolling the dice. But what if the Upside Down itself is the result of someone rolling really, really badly? Keep that question in mind, because the nuclear theory isn't just about bombs. Nuclear wasteland. Here's where things get genuinely disturbing, because some fans believe the Upside Down isn't just a random alternate dimension, but actually a post-apocalyptic version of Hawkins destroyed by nuclear war. The ash floating everywhere, the toxic atmosphere, the dead plants. It all screams radiation fallout, rather than supernatural evil. Season 3 hammers home the Russian Cold War angle with secret bases and weapons testing under the mall, and suddenly the nuclear connection stops feeling like such a stretch. The novels, especially Suspicious Minds, detail government experiments that could have accidentally triggered dimensional rifts during weapons research, mixing atomic science with psychic powers in ways that would make any physicist cringe. Visual evidence shows the Upside Down stuck in a specific time period, right when tensions between superpowers were at their peak, frozen like a snapshot of the exact moment everything went wrong. Reddit fans have pointed out that Chernobyl happened in 1986, right in the show's timeline, and the parallels between radioactive disasters and the toxic Upside Down environment are impossible to ignore. The fact that Hawkins' lab was running sketchy government programs during the height of Cold War paranoia adds another layer, suggesting maybe they were testing something that combined nuclear tech with dimensional travel. Season 5 teasers and fan speculation mention elements that sound suspiciously like post-nuclear war scenarios, where infrastructure has completely collapsed. This theory ranks around a 6 out of 10 for popularity, but it's gaining serious traction on forums because the more you examine the Upside Down's properties, the more it looks like someone dropped a bomb and ripped reality apart. But if the Upside Down is a nuclear future, why is it frozen in 1983 specifically? That date matters more than you think, because it's not just about when the gate opened, it's about when something else happened that we haven't connected yet. The mirror universe theory is about to make that click. Mirror universes. Moving beyond simple alternate dimensions, this theory proposes that Stranger Things operates on a full multiverse system where multiple mirror versions of Hawkins exist simultaneously. We're not talking about one evil flip side anymore, but potentially dozens of parallel worlds where tiny differences create massive ripple effects. Season 4 really kicked this theory into overdrive when Vecna got banished, and suddenly fans started wondering if he might have access to other dimensional layers beyond just the Upside Down we've seen. The comics dive into parallel realms, showing Will's survival playing out differently, depending on which universe you're viewing, suggesting that reality splits every time a major choice gets made. Quantum physics enters the chat here because the many worlds theory from Real Science proposes exactly this setup. where every decision creates a new branch of reality. The fandom wiki exploded with discussions about how characters might exist in multiple states across different universes, with some versions dead while others thrive. Games have started incorporating these concepts through branching storylines, where player choices determine which mirror universe you end up exploring. Visual cues in the show, like mirrored camera shots and symbolic reflections, hint that we're meant to be thinking about multiple realities layered on top of each other. Stage play material from the first Shadow introduces cosmic forces that seem to operate across dimensional boundaries, implying there's a bigger structure beyond what we've witnessed so far. So we've got multiple realities, frozen timelines, and dimensional layers, which means characters who died in one universe might still be alive in another. Remember that, because we're about to talk about someone who definitely should come back. And now, you understand why it's actually possible. Kaylee returns. Remember 8, that girl with the illusion powers who showed up for exactly one episode in Season 2 and then vanished completely? This theory insists she's coming back for the final battle. And honestly, it would be weird if she didn't. The show spent valuable screen time introducing Kali and establishing that Eleven has psychic siblings scattered around the world. So leaving that thread dangling would be terrible storytelling. Fan communities have been begging for her return, with speculation hitting around a 5 out of 10 on popularity scales, which feels low considering how much potential her character has. Season 5 setup suggests a massive confrontation is coming, and what better way to even the odds than bringing back someone who can create illusions to confuse enemies. The comics expand on her story in Into the Fire, showing more of her background and abilities, proving the creators haven't forgotten about her despite the long absence. Her power set of making people see things that aren't there could be absolutely crucial against something like Vecna, who operates through mental manipulation and fear. The MK Ultra inspiration behind the Lab Kids implies there are more subjects out there with equally wild abilities, and gathering them all for one last stand would create an epic Avengers-style team-up moment. Whether she comes back as a trusted ally or someone who's been corrupted into betraying the group remains the big question. But either way, her return would add serious stakes to the finale. But Kaylee's return only matters if there's something bigger than Vecna to fight. And here's the thing, every D&D campaign needs a final boss that makes the previous villains look like warm-up acts. So let's talk about what might actually be waiting in those dimensional shadows. Bigger villain. Just when you thought Vecna was the ultimate big bad, this theory drops a bomb by suggesting there's an even more powerful entity pulling strings behind the scenes. We're talking about something cosmic and ancient that makes our current villain look like a puppet. Dungeons & Dragons lore gets really relevant here, because the game features creatures like Boris, who operate on God, like power levels. And the show has already proven it loves mining D&D for inspiration. Seasons 1 through 4 keep dropping references to increasingly powerful monsters, building a hierarchy that implies the hive mind structure goes higher than we've seen. YouTube theory videos have dissected every frame looking for clues about this potential cosmic horror, and the evidence keeps mounting that Vecna might just be middle management. The games throw you against boss fights that feel designed to prepare players for something beyond the current threat level, as if the developers know what's coming next. Lovecraftian horror influences seep through the show's DNA, with themes of incomprehensible evil from beyond our reality, and that genre always saves the worst monster for last. The stage play reveals that Henry's backstory might be incomplete or deliberately manipulated, suggesting someone else planted ideas in his head and set him on his dark path. If Season 5 introduces an Elder God type entity that's been orchestrating everything from dimensional shadows, it would reframe the entire series as a slow reveal of true cosmic terror. Now you're probably wondering, if there's something bigger than Vecna, why hasn't it shown up yet? Well, what if it has, and we've been watching it work through puppets this whole time? That's where Vecna's backstory stops adding up, because someone with that much power wouldn't need to explain himself unless he was covering for someone else. Vecna's lies. Speaking of Henry's backstory, what if everything we learned about Vecna's origin in Season 4 was carefully constructed deception? This theory argues that the flashbacks and explanations we received don't tell the whole truth. The stage play The First Shadow provides prequel information that contradicts certain elements from the show's version of events, creating discrepancies that feel intentional rather than accidental. Horror narratives love unreliable narrators, and Vecna has every reason to paint himself as a misunderstood victim, rather than admit to something darker. Recent YouTube coverage has been buzzing about this possibility, rating it around a 7 out of 10 for plausibility, because the Duffer Brothers are known for subverting expectations. Visual storytelling in Season 4 uses dreamlike sequences and distorted memories when showing Henry's past, which could be a subtle hint that we're seeing a manipulated version. The idea of cosmic influences from beyond suggests that maybe Henry wasn't acting alone, or even of his own free will, but was being guided by something that needed a human vessel. If his entire revenge motivation, based on childhood trauma, turns out to be either exaggerated or completely fabricated, it changes our understanding of every action he's taken. The stage play hints at larger forces at work during his youth, implying his transformation into Vecna involved external entities rather than just personal darkness. So Vecna might be lying about his origins, which means his connection to other characters might be lies too. And that brings us to one of the wildest family theories that suddenly makes way more sense if nothing Vecna said can be trusted. Separated twins. This wild theory proposes that Eleven and Will aren't just connected through trauma and the Upside Down, but are actually twins separated at birth during Hawkins' lab experiments. It sounds insane until you start listing all the weird connections between them. Both characters have deep ties to the Upside Down, with Will being the first victim, and Eleven being the one who accidentally opened the gate, creating a symmetry that feels too perfect to be coincidence. The novels explore lab origins, extensively showing how Brenner ran experiments on multiple children, and separating twins to test nature versus nurture would fit his twisted methodology perfectly. Their psychic connection manifests differently, with Eleven having telekinetic powers, while Will seems more sensitive to dimensional presences. But maybe that's just two sides of the same genetic gift. Visual parallels in how they're shot and framed throughout the series create mirror images, with both characters serving as bridges between worlds. Cold War eugenics programs that inspired the show's government experiments absolutely would have involved twin studies, because real-life programs did exactly that. The theory ranks around a 4 out of 10 for popularity, making it pretty wild, even by fan theory standards. But the intrigue factor is undeniable. Psychic bonds between twins appear in tons of sci-fi and horror, so the show borrowing that trope while putting a Stranger Things spin on it would track perfectly with how they've handled other concepts. Whether Eleven and Will are twins or not, they're definitely connected through the Upside Down in ways the show keeps hinting at. And there's this one moment in Season 1 that proves Eleven's been protecting Will since before they met. It's so subtle, most people missed it completely. Demogorgon distraction. Here's a smaller theory that focuses on a specific moment from Season 1, but has fascinating implications for how Eleven's powers actually work. The idea is that when the Demogorgon was chasing Eleven, she deliberately distracted the creature telepathically to redirect it to Will and give herself a chance to escape. The timing of that scene always felt weird, because the Demogorgon just suddenly gives up chasing Eleven right when Will is taken, and we know Eleven was escaping the lab at that exact moment. Comics showing Will's perspective from inside the Upside Down during The Other Side reveal details about portal manipulations and how consciousness can affect dimensional barriers. If Eleven could project her presence through the void to divert the creature's attention, it demonstrates her powers working on a completely different level than we understood. TikTok videos have gone viral analyzing this moment frame by frame, showing how the creature's behavior changes abruptly without any visual explanation. The concept of using telepathy as a tactical diversion opens up strategic possibilities we haven't fully explored, like Eleven drawing enemies away from herself during fights. This theory sits around a 5 out of 10 for popularity, but it adds emotional weight to Eleven's connection with Will from the very beginning, suggesting she's been saving herself at his expense since before they even met. Portal manipulation as a power subset would explain some of the weirder moments throughout the series where dimensional barriers seem to respond to will and intention rather than just brute force. That distraction moment proves Eleven's powers work across dimensions even when she doesn't realize it, which explains how Vecna could be using similar techniques to target specific people from his past. And boy, does he have a grudge list. Henry's revenge. The stage play and Season 5 leaks have fueled this theory that Vecna's entire killing spree is actually motivated by revenge against specific people who wronged him during his youth. We're not just talking random victims, but carefully selected targets with personal connections. Young Henry's story in The First Shadow shows him facing bullying and isolation, setting up classic horror revenge motivation similar to Carrie or other supernatural payback tales. Season 5 memory sequences reportedly dig into his past relationships and the people who made his life miserable before he became a monster. The pattern of his Season 4 victims shows he targets people dealing with trauma and guilt, but maybe there's a hidden layer where those specific emotional states belong to people connected to his past. Fan threads on Reddit have been mapping out potential links between current Hawkins residents and families that might have interacted with the Creels decades ago. If Vecna is systematically working through a list of people whose parents or relatives hurt him, it transforms his actions from random evil into calculated vengeance. The Carrie comparison becomes even more apt because that story was all about a bullied teen using powers to punish everyone who wronged them, and Stranger Things loves its Stephen King references. This theory hovers around a 6 out of 10 in terms of fan discussion, but it adds psychological complexity to Vecna beyond just being a generic world-ending threat. But Henry's revenge killing spree might have included one target that reveals his entire selection process. Eddie Munson wasn't random, and once you see the pattern, you'll realize who else is probably on that list. Eddie's targeting. Expanding on the revenge theme, this specific theory suggests Vecna deliberately targeted Eddie Munson as a victim not randomly, but because Eddie represented something specific. The outcast metalhead D&D player fit a profile that connected to Henry's own experiences. Season 4 made a huge deal about Eddie being society's scapegoat, with the whole town turning against him over satanic panic nonsense. And young Henry faced similar persecution for being different. Game storylines explore outcast arcs, showing how troubled youth get blamed for things beyond their control, mirroring both Eddie's situation and potentially. The hive mind puppet aspect gets interesting here, because if Vecna saw Eddie as either a kindred spirit or a reminder of his own suffering, it adds twisted logic to the targeting. Visual and thematic parallels exist between Eddie's persecution and flashbacks to Henry's isolation, suggesting the show wants us drawing those connections. Troubled youth tropes from 1980s media constantly featured kids who didn't fit in getting blamed for supernatural events, and both characters embody that archetype. This theory ranks around a 5 out of 10, making it pretty underrated, despite how much sense it makes thematically. If Eddie's death wasn't just heroic sacrifice, but also the result of Vecna's psychological fixations, it deepens the tragedy while making the villain more psychologically complex. Eddie's death following a pattern is bad enough. But what if Vecna and the Mind Flayer weren't even supposed to exist? What if the real villain has been the government the entire time, and they accidentally created the monsters trying to create weapons? Because that theory has some seriously disturbing evidence. Government creation. This conspiracy theory proposes that the Mind Flayer isn't some ancient evil from another dimension, but actually an entity accidentally created by Hawkins' lab during their experiments. The government literally made their own worst enemy. Seasons 2 through 4 show the Mind Flayer possessing people and spreading like an infection, behavior that could result from biological or psychic experiments gone catastrophically wrong. The novels especially. Suspicious Minds detail testing protocols that mixed drugs, psychic powers, and dimensional research in ways that scream unintended consequences. If you view the Mind Flayer as a side effect of opening gates and flooding our world with upside-down energy, combined with psychic radiation from test subjects, suddenly its existence makes horrifying sense. Lab side effects could include consciousness splitting off from human hosts and evolving into something independent and hostile, feeding on the fear and psychic energy that created it. MK Ultra parallels are impossible to ignore because real government programs absolutely created lasting trauma and psychological damage. So why not a psychic parasite? The theory sits at a solid 7 out of 10 for popularity, because conspiracy angles always grab attention. Plus, it makes Brenner even more culpable for every death. Accidental entity creation fits perfectly with Stranger Things themes about science and ambition causing disasters when ethics get ignored. So the government might have created the Mind Flayer. Vecna's targeting people systematically, and everything connects back to lab experiments. Which brings us to the most debated theory in the entire fandom, one that's either beautiful storytelling or complete wishful thinking, depending on who you ask: Byler romance. Arguably the most divisive theory in the entire fandom, this suggests Mike and Will's relationship will evolve into explicitly romantic, rather than staying platonic. Fans have spent years analyzing every interaction and longing glance between these two. Seasons 1 through 5 show their dynamic shifting and deepening, with Will clearly harboring feelings that might go beyond friendship, based on his reactions and choices. Creator interviews have dropped hints about exploring identity and coming of age in 1980s America, where being different carried serious consequences, potentially setting up that storyline. The emotional arcs throughout the series build toward confessions and resolutions of unspoken feelings, and Will's character development seems designed to culminate in some kind of truth about his feelings. Polls on fan sites show the theory ranking around an 8 out of 10 for how much it gets discussed, though opinions split hard between supporters and skeptics. Coming-of-age stories from the 1980s often featured young people discovering their identities against societal pressure, so the show tackling that theme would fit its nostalgic framework. The evidence includes small moments like Will's painting, his struggle to explain his feelings, and how Mike seems increasingly aware that something deeper is going on. Whether the show actually goes there or keeps things ambiguous remains hotly debated, but the groundwork has definitely been laid for that possibility. Whether Mike and Will's story goes romantic or stays platonic, it's building toward an emotional climax. And emotional climaxes in Stranger Things usually mean sacrifice. Which brings us to the theory that's been haunting fans since season 1, the one we all know is coming, but don't want to admit: Elle's sacrifice. Every hero's journey includes potential sacrifice, and this theory suggests Eleven's arc is building toward a final selfless act that saves everyone, but costs her everything. The show has been foreshadowing this possibility since season 1. Parallels exist throughout all seasons, showing Eleven repeatedly putting herself in danger to close gates and stop monsters, establishing a pattern that could culminate in ultimate sacrifice. The VR game explores different endings, including ones where portal closure requires someone staying behind, testing how players react to those scenarios. Heroic cycles in sci-fi almost always involve the chosen one giving themselves up to restore balance, and 11 fits that archetype perfectly. Thematic elements about friendship and protecting the people you love point towards sacrifice as the ultimate expression of those values. Season 5 setup has been positioning pieces on the board for a confrontation where someone will need to seal dimensional rifts permanently, and Eleven's unique connection to the gates makes her the obvious candidate. The theory ranks around a 6 out of 10 for popularity, because fans are split between wanting a happy ending and recognizing the narrative logic of sacrifice. Whether she actually dies, or just loses her powers, or gets trapped in another dimension, the core idea of her choosing others over herself feels inevitable at this point. But what if Eleven's sacrifice isn't about dying? It's about understanding that she's been playing out a predetermined path this whole time. Remember that D&D prophecy theory from earlier? It's about to become crucial, because the kids' campaigns haven't just been mirroring events, they've been predicting them with terrifying accuracy. D&D prophecies. Taking the metagame concept further, this theory proposes that the kids' D&D campaigns aren't just mirroring events, but actually predicting them, like prophecies guiding the plot. Every campaign becomes a roadmap for what's coming next. Season 2 drops major clues when campaign elements match up with real threats before those threats fully emerge, as if the game knows the future. Games and quests in tie-in media let you explore how D&D mechanics could literally guide strategy, with dice rolls representing fate and campaign choices revealing optimal paths. The idea of the Lost Knight representing Hopper or other characters filling archetypal roles from their campaigns creates a meta-narrative layer that's extremely satisfying. Easter egg-heavy episodes pack in references that only make sense if you view the D&D sessions as narrative frameworks rather than just flavor. Mike as the Dungeon Master essentially becomes the voice of fate, describing challenges before the party faces them in reality. Prophecy through game mechanics is a wild concept, but it fits the show's love of blending fantasy elements with sci-fi horror, creating a unique tone that sets Stranger Things apart. If Season 5 reveals that the kids somehow tapped into dimensional knowledge through their campaigns, it would explain why their game sessions feel so unnervingly accurate. So if the campaigns are prophetic, then the kids have been accessing some kind of dimensional knowledge without realizing it, which means other characters might also have hidden connections they don't understand. And there's one mom who's been suspiciously disconnected from all the supernatural stuff, despite living in Hawkins her entire life. Karen's connection. This theory dives into potential family secrets by suggesting Karen Wheeler has hidden ties to the Creel family that she's either forgotten or deliberately suppressed. Visual cues and promotional materials have sparked this speculation. Season 4 posters and imagery show interesting parallels between Karen's appearance and Creel family members, as if the designers want eagle-eyed fans noticing similarities. The stage play flashbacks explore Creel history in detail, and certain timeline elements leave room for Karen to be connected as either a survivor or distant relative. If she escaped the Creel House tragedy as a child and was adopted under a new identity, it would explain why she seems disconnected from those events, despite living in Hawkins her whole life. Family resemblance theories get tricky because actors don't always share features, but the show has been careful with casting when biological relationships matter. This connection would raise personal stakes for the Wheeler family dramatically, because suddenly their mom has first-hand trauma linked to the season's main villain. Promotional material choices usually aren't accidents with shows this carefully crafted, so fans putting pieces together from posters and teasers often end up correct. The survivor angle works better than sibling theories because age gaps and timelines make more sense. Plus, it creates a redemption arc where Karen confronts buried memories. Karen potentially being connected to the Creels means family secrets run deeper than anyone suspected. And you know who loves keeping secrets? Dr. Brenner, who might not actually be dead, which would explain so many loose ends. Brenner lives. Despite watching him get mauled by Demogorgons in Season 4, many fans refuse to believe Dr. Brenner is actually dead. The show has a history of bringing people back from apparent deaths. Precedent exists with characters like Hopper surviving impossible situations, teaching viewers that death isn't always permanent in the Stranger Things universe. The Nina Project episode shows Brenner's obsession with preserving himself and his work, suggesting he'd have contingency plans for exactly this kind of situation. Clone theories have emerged with fans proposing lab technology could have created backup bodies or consciousness transfers, though that veers into harder sci-fi than the show usually goes. His survival would make narrative sense, because leaving his character's arc unfinished after being so central to the lab's crimes feels wrong dramatically. Speculative novels and fan fiction explore various survival methods, from simple escape to complex resurrection tech, showing how hungry audiences are for his return. Physical evidence from the scene leaves just enough ambiguity that you could argue he got extracted before dying, especially since we didn't see an absolute confirmed body. If Season 5 brings him back in any form, whether as a full character or even just flashbacks or recordings, it would provide closure to his relationship with Eleven and force her to confront her complicated feelings about her abuser. Brenner surviving would mean the human monsters are just as unkillable as the supernatural ones. And speaking of unkillable threats, we've been focused on monsters and governments. But what if the real danger has been environmental this whole time? Because the upside down spreading looks a lot like ecological disaster. Environmental disaster. Moving into more thematic territory, this theory suggests Season 5 will incorporate real 1980s concerns about pollution and environmental destruction into its plot. The upside down itself becomes a metaphor for ecological disaster. Hints throughout previous seasons show the upside down spreading like contamination, killing plant life and poisoning the atmosphere in ways that mirror environmental catastrophes. Creator interviews have mentioned wanting to evolve themes beyond just supernatural horror to include commentary on real-world issues that haunted the 1980s. Love Canal and similar toxic waste scandals from that era provide historical context for stories about hidden disasters poisoning communities, fitting perfectly into Hawkins' narrative. Game puzzles include environmental elements where you solve problems related to toxic spread and contamination, suggesting that mechanic might become central to the plot. If the final battle involves not just defeating monsters, but healing dimensional pollution and restoring ecological balance, it elevates the story beyond simple good versus evil. The 1980s saw massive cultural shifts in environmental awareness, with movements gaining momentum, so reflecting that in a period piece makes sense. Dimensional decay as a parallel to ecological collapse works thematically, because both involve consequences of messing with natural systems without understanding the full impact. Environmental collapse spreading across dimensions is terrifying, But it gets worse when you realize time doesn't work the same way over there. The freeze isn't random. It's a clue about something much bigger involving time itself. Time mechanics. The frozen nature of the Upside Down, stuck in 1983, has always been one of its weirdest features, and this theory explores possible time manipulation elements behind that phenomenon. We might be dealing with temporal mechanics, not just dimensional ones. Visual evidence shows everything preserved exactly as it was when the gate first opened, suggesting time doesn't flow normally across dimensional barriers. Season 5 teasers hint at more complex temporal elements, with references to memories and moments from different periods bleeding together. The freeze itself could be a side effect of dimensional rifting, where time gets locked at the moment of connection, creating a snapshot reality. Whether this means actual time travel is possible, or just that different dimensions experience time differently remains unclear, but the setup is there. Upside-down freeze mechanics in games give you speed buffs or slow motion effects, implying time distortion is an acknowledged property of the space. If characters can manipulate these temporal elements, they could theoretically revert events or prevent disasters, though that opens up messy paradox questions. The Duffer Brothers probably won't go full-time loop, because that's narratively risky. But acknowledging that time works differently across dimensions adds complexity to the supernatural physics, time manipulation, dimensional rifts, and apocalyptic futures. With all this cosmic horror, you'd think the solution would come from Eleven, or Vecna, or some other powerful entity. But what if the key to everything is the one person nobody's been paying attention to? I'm talking about Ted Wheeler, Ted's moment. In what might be the wildest underdog theory, some fans believe Ted Wheeler has been set up for a secretly heroic or pivotal reveal. The most overlooked dad in the series might finally get his moment. Fan analysis highlights how Ted's understated personality and seeming obliviousness could be elaborate cover for someone more aware than he appears. His constant presence in the background of major events without ever quite noticing them creates a running joke that might be building to something. If Ted suddenly reveals he's known more than he let on, or takes action at a crucial moment, it would subvert expectations perfectly, while rewarding fans who've been watching him. The show loves giving unlikely characters their hero moments. And Ted represents the ultimate underestimation candidate. Whether he's secretly competent, connected to deeper mysteries, or just finally pays attention at the right moment, giving him purpose would be satisfying. This theory barely registers on popularity scales because most people write Ted off completely, which is exactly why a twist involving him would land so hard. Sometimes the best narrative moves involve the characters nobody saw coming, and Ted has been positioned in that exact spot for 5 seasons. Ted getting a hero moment would be peak Stranger Things. But let's be real, the answer probably isn't that simple. Because what if the Upside Down isn't an alternate dimension or nuclear wasteland at all? What if we've been looking at Hawkins' actual future this entire time? Future Hawkins. Rounding out the dimensional theories, this one proposes the Upside Down isn't an alternate dimension or past nuclear wasteland, but actually a dystopian future version of Hawkins. Everything we're seeing is what happens if the characters fail. Atmospheric details and visual design of the Upside Down show advanced decay, suggesting long-term abandonment, rather than instant destruction, supporting a future timeline interpretation. Lore about how dimensions connect could allow for temporal as well as spatial displacement, meaning the gate doesn't just lead sideways to another world, but forward to a possible future. If the heroes are literally seeing the consequences of failure every time they enter that space, it raises stakes astronomically because they're fighting to prevent that exact outcome. The frozen time element works differently under this theory, suggesting we're seeing a future moment preserved because that's when time ends for Hawkins if evil wins. Dimensional buffer concepts from physics propose that parallel timelines might exist simultaneously, accessible through the right conditions or technology. This interpretation makes every trip to the Upside Down a glimpse of apocalyptic prophecy, showing characters exactly what they're trying to prevent. Whether Season 5 confirms this angle, or keeps dimensional mechanics ambiguous, the future wasteland theory adds dread because it means the threat isn't just death, but the complete destruction of everything they know across time itself. A future apocalypse means everything the characters are fighting for is to prevent that exact timeline. But here's the thing. If minds can exist separately from bodies in psychic voids, then everyone Vecna killed might not actually be gone. They could be trapped, waiting, and that changes everything about the final battle. Victims preserved, circling back to mind related theories. This suggests that everyone Vecna killed might have their consciousness preserved within his mental realm. Death isn't the end, but a different kind of prison. Season 4 introduced psychic void spaces, where 11 searches for people, establishing that minds can exist separately from bodies in this universe. If Vecna collects consciousness like trophies or fuel, it means characters we thought were gone might still exist in some form inside his head. The idea of trapped souls creates potential for internal rebellion, where victims fight back from within, sabotaging Vecna during crucial moments. Psychic realm mechanics, shown in various episodes, demonstrate that mental spaces can host multiple people simultaneously, supporting the technical feasibility. This theory offers hope that beloved characters aren't permanently lost, while also adding horror, because being trapped in your killer's mind might be worse than death. Mind trap concepts appear frequently in horror and sci-fi, from Nightmare on Elm Street to The Matrix, giving the show plenty of genre precedent to draw from. If Season 5 includes scenes of 11, or others entering Vecna's consciousness and finding prisoners, it creates rescue mission stakes alongside the physical battle. Preserved consciousness means rescue missions, internal rebellions, and maybe even resurrections. But 11 can't do that alone. She's going to need help from people with similar powers. And there were a lot more test subjects than just her and Kaylee, which brings us to the final theory, the one that could turn the last battle into something completely unexpected. Test subjects return. Finally, this theory expands on Kali by suggesting multiple test subjects from Brenner's experiments will emerge to help or hinder the final battle. We've only met 2 of them, and there were supposedly many more. The show established that numbered children exist scattered around the world, each with potentially different psychic abilities that could tip the scales. Tying up loose ends from earlier seasons by bringing back these characters would create a sense of narrative completeness while expanding the power sets available. Whether they show up as allies rallying to help 11, or as damaged people manipulated by villains, their presence adds layers to the conflict. Previous seasons introduced both Kaylee and hints about others, suggesting the Duffer Brothers planned for this thread to matter eventually. An Avengers-style assembly of psychic-powered individuals fighting together would be visually spectacular and emotionally satisfying, especially if it represents 11 finding family beyond Joyce and Hopper. The MK Ultra inspiration implies there could be dozens of test subjects, each representing different experiment focuses, creating a whole catalog of abilities. If Season 5 delivers on this by showing what happened to the other numbers, it validates years of fan speculation, while opening up spin-off possibilities for characters we barely know. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every Easter egg you missed while watching Stranger Things, Season 5, Episode 4, click the video on the screen.